So hello, welcome to Breaking Ground, Making Waves. It's a planetary speaker series highlighting the incredible work of community leaders. And today we have a very, very special guest, Chris Moore, who is the Executive Director of Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Welcome, Chris, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you. And just a slight correction. I'm the Virginia Exec Director at Chesapeake Bay Foundation,
Yes.
and not the whole organization. So I have my
Yes.
my little piece.
Perfect. So that brings me to my first question. What got you into conservation and advocacy in environmental space?
Sure. So I grew up as one of those outdoor kids who spent as much time, on the water or out in the woods and at the beach as possible. And to this day, continue those pursuits is what it amounts to. But, that really gave me a bird's eye view of what happens out in our ecosystem and also how we might be able to change things. And, as someone who was looking at the fishing regulations each year, you saw that things change from each year. Looking at waterfowl regulations each year, things changed. And so that gave me, even at a fairly early age, insight into, this is a management process that a lot of people need to be involved in. And you need to have the science, but you also need to have the public input. So that was always very interesting to me. And I was lucky enough to major in environmental studies as an undergrad. Actually started my career working in the environmental consulting industry up in the Northern Virginia area. And that was a really great experience in exposing me to a lot of different environmental issues throughout the country. Previously, in Hampton Roads and Chesapeake Bay, I was very much exposed to those issues. But we don't have a big manufacturing base here in Hampton Roads except for shipbuilding. And so I worked on a number of different industries like iron and steel and chemical manufacturing. They gave me a much broader understanding of various environmental issues. And in the back of my mind, I always wanted to get back into fisheries management and ecosystem restoration. And so luckily, a position at Chesapeake Bay Foundation opened up here in Virginia. When I was up in Northern Virginia, and I was fortunately a successful candidate. And that's been a little over 20 years ago. And so I'm still here today.
So you joined CBF Virginia in 2005, if I'm not
Correct.
mistaken.
Yes.
And you were a scientist, and then you moved on to become the executive director of Virginia Chesapeake Bay Foundation. What was the transition like?
So yeah, so I think my career at CBF has been really interesting because I came on board, and it's still my favorite title ever, I think, in my work. My first title at CBF was called Science Advocate. And I really enjoyed that title because it was like, okay, CBF is a science-based organization. That's my background. And, we're going to advocate for decisions based on the best available science. And so that position was a little more broad-based in terms of working on issues, mostly here in Hampton Roads, but a little bit on the statewide level, working on some fisheries issues, but also working on some of the more run-of-the-mill type environmental issues that you may have, local wetlands decisions, engaging grassroots and things like that. Did that for a number of years, and then I started focusing more on just the science aspect of things, also focusing more on some of the broader conversations that we were having around Chesapeake Bay, like the new Chesapeake Bay watershed agreement, focusing a bit more on restoration. So there's obviously oyster restoration that we do a fair amount of, but also shoreline restoration activities, underwater grasses, things like that. So that became a bigger part of my work. And also more policy work was part of that. Everything from legislative type policy and meeting with legislators both in and out of session, but also getting them out in the ecosystem in order to help them better understand some of the issues that we're working on during the legislative session. But doing more of that policy work. And sometimes that's, getting people to write in or call into their elected officials or decision makers, but also participating in those policy discussions as well. Then I kind of tracked a little bit more to the fisheries world and was focused more on fisheries and oyster type work and a little bit heavier dose of legislative policy. And then I ended up where I am now as the Virginia Executive Director. So it's been a neat ride here at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
Amazing. I just realized, like, so as Planetary, of course, we've engaged with Chesapeake Bay Foundation, but for somebody who does not know, could you talk a little bit about the foundation, what it focuses on, and the amazing things that it's doing in Virginia?
Sure, be glad to. Yeah. So Chesapeake Bay Foundation is an organization. We're a nonprofit. We're a little bit over 50 years old at this point, but we are an organization focused on improving the health of not only Chesapeake Bay, but the health of rivers and streams and our lands in the Chesapeake Bay watershed as well. And so I think that's a really important distinction because some people think, oh, you only work on that body of water, but actually we work throughout the landscape, and it's a 64,000 square mile watershed, so parts of 6 states in the District of Columbia. So there's a lot to do, as you can imagine, in that. And so, as an organization, we focus a lot on restoration, which I've talked a little bit about already, and we've talked about things like oyster restoration, shoreline restoration. We do a lot with agricultural partners as well, so kind of the same things in terms of we're trying to restore shorelines, but we're also doing things like fencing out a lot of streams, helping farmers better use nutrient management plans, thinking about rotational grazing for cattle operations, basically finding ways that farmers can be as successful, if not more successful, but living a little bit lighter on the land is what it amounts to. We have urban restoration programs that are focused on planting trees, removing pavement, things like that in urban areas. There's a lot of discussion, especially over the last few years, about the heat island effect and how that has negative outcomes, especially from a health perspective for residents. So, trying to make sure we get some of those areas greener than they used to be is another big part of our work. As I touched on earlier, too, we do a tremendous amount of legislative and policy work here in Virginia. The legislative time here in Virginia is very short compared to a lot of places. On even numbered years, we have a 60-day session. On odd number years, it's only a 45-day session. So there is a tremendous amount of work that happens in a very short period of time during those legislative sessions. So we work with legislators outside the session to kind of get ready, think about legislation that we want to put forward or things that folks that are partners of ours might want to put forward as well. Then obviously working on things that we maybe don't want to see come to fruition as well. So that's another big part. Um, Also, CBF is very lucky to be the largest environmental education organization in the U.S. So we spend a tremendous amount of time and resources, helping educate the next group of adults. And we do that through experiential based learning. We actually get them out on the resource and get their feet wet, their hands dirty, and really get them in tune to the resource. And so, one of the questions I always get is, do you go into schools? And we're like, no, that's really not our place. We want the schools to come to us and make sure that the students get out on the resource and really understand it and enjoy it and make that connection. We're really, really fortunate that we actually have 3 island education centers. So students come out for usually 3-day type trips to really get immersed in the resource. And we also have a number of 1-day boat programs and 1-day canoe rig programs that we use for students, but we also use for a number of different adult programs as well on a regular basis.
That's amazing. That's just incredible array of work that CBF does. And you've been with CBF for like 20 years. I'm curious what gets you going. I'm sure there are a lot of challenges. So one, I'd love to know, those if there was something that you can, an anecdote of like that one particular challenge that kind of got you, but really genuinely what gets you going.
So, well, my background being in fisheries, there are a number of challenges that we see there. And I think the thing about fisheries is we really can see a difference being made if we put forth the right management strategies, if we make changes in the health of the resource as well, we really can see fruits of our labor. So that's one thing that has always been exciting to me. Same kind of with the oyster restoration work, and I don't get to do quite as much of that as I used to now. But when you go out and look at a site before you start a restoration program, and it maybe has one or two oysters per square meter on it, and you go back a year after you have actually started restoration, and now you have 700 oysters per square meter on it. You really can see the fruits of your labor there. And then, you go back maybe a little bit later and you see people fishing on top of it, or you see wading birds on using that oyster reef. Those really can be fruits of your work. I think another part that's always exciting is the legislative work, and it's tough at times, but those are times where you really can make a difference in what the Commonwealth is going to do in the next 4, 5, 6, 10, maybe 20 years, because legislation, yes, it's hard to pass. But making sure you have good legislative proposals that do pass, and maybe you knock back a few of the bad ones too. That's something that really is going to stay throughout the Commonwealth for a long period of time. And so, when that session is up and running, it's something that you get up for every morning, know that you really can make a difference with those efforts.
Actually have two questions there. I'm really curious. You have a great background in the private sector. You work for, a conservation group, which is so very active. I'm curious how you look at balancing economic development and the protection of the bay itself. And the second question is, because you do so much advocacy, I'm sure you meet a lot of people who also don't perhaps see or think about conservation in the way that, a lot of others do. How do you sort of try to bring them on board?
Yeah, I think I'll actually take the second question first, if that's okay. So,
Yeah.
bringing people on board. What I have found, and I think what our organization has found, is kind of what you were alluding to, is so many people have so many different interests, and it's usually one or two things that really piques their interest and gets them involved. And so I think it's important for groups like Chesapeake Bay Foundation to put out there a variety of either opportunities to engage or educational opportunities in order to basically find that niche that people want to be involved in. And a good example, we've been building living shorelines much more frequently the last couple of years. And in fact, we just finished our largest one here in Virginia, over 1,000 linear feet over in Hampton this summer. And there are people who come out all summer long, even though it's 100 degrees every day, and they want to get wet and muddy and sweaty, and they want to put oyster shell bags down, and they want to move concrete reef balls, and they want to do all those type of things. And that's great. And those are some of our more, invested volunteers. There's other folks that are like, I don't want to do that, but you know what? I really want to go talk to my elected official about what I see as an important issue in my community. And so that's another avenue that you want to get people involved. We have a really neat and very long-standing oyster gardening program. And so that's a program where people grow oysters from their dock or their marina slip, or we're expanding more and more into public areas as well. But people basically care for somewhere around 500 baby oysters for a year. And not only do they get to see the oysters grow, but they get to see the other things that live their life on an oyster reef. So that sometimes it's blue crabs, sometimes it's baby eels, sometimes it's fish like feathered blennies and mummy chugs and things like that. So um, all those different opportunities allow people to connect in a way that is unique to them, and hopefully breeds additional connections and additional actions in the future. So going back to your first question about economic development, yeah, that's one of the things that um, people kind of always maybe ask us or think about in terms of how do you have economic development in the way that continues to protect the bay's health and the bay's vitality. And that's one of the things I think it's always important for folks to understand about groups like Chesapeake Bay Foundation is that, yes, we very much want to see a economically viable region. It's that only helps us in terms of making sure we have the resources necessary to have a healthy bay. And so we just want to make sure it's done in a way that is a little lighter on the land at times, and making sure that our permits that allow facilities to operate are stringent enough so there's not water quality impairments associated with that. Making sure that we protect the wetlands and the buffers along our shoreline so they can do the really important work of helping to filter pollutants out of stormwater before it gets to the water edge. Also making sure that that habitat that's so important along the edges of our rivers and streams is protected as well. Thinking about the farmers, which we talked about a little earlier. Again, we want to make sure that they are very much economically viable, and hopefully some of the practices that we work with them on, like rotational grazing and nutrient management plans, makes them actually a more efficient operation and helps them become more economically viable than they would have beforehand. And then the last one I'll touch on again, just because I do like to talk about this so much, is our shellfish growing here in Virginia. The fact that aquaculture really is a nutrient reduction practice in a lot of ways. And so we're helping to reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus in our waterways. We're helping to provide cleaner, clearer water as a result of those efforts. That's a business that not only thrives on clean water, but helps produce more of it. And the more of those type of operations we can see, the better.
Amazing. So, a message to the private sector, anybody, there's absolutely a way to balance economic development and conservation. And if they want pointers, they can come to you, I suppose.
Yes, for sure, for
Okay.
sure.
I was just thinking of the boat ride you took us on, and you showed us that living shoreline, I believe, and the shellfish, and you were so excited about it. Again, like, firstly, I believe you're U.S. Coast Guard certified. It,
Correct.
oh,
Yep,
yes.
Captain. Yep.
And so did that coincide, or you're like, okay, I'm certified. I absolutely want to make use of this,
Yes.
and yeah.
Well, that was another benefit of working here is the fact that we do run a lot of trips for a whole host of different organizations. Obviously, we talked about the education component, but we also run a lot of trips for press. I touched on a little bit. We run a lot of educational trips for elected officials as well, and so we like to make sure that the folks who are running those trips are very competent in handling a boat. So our folks who are doing that are all Coast Guard licensed captains. And so, as we talked about earlier, I spent a lot of time on the water growing up and was lucky enough to have enough hours. It's actually, you have to have a fairly significant amount of time on the water in order to get a captain's license. So I was able to have that. And it was one of those things that you hang with pride, kind of beside your diplomas if you've actually attained that. So, but as you got to experience that day, it's a great way to get people out on the resource and show them all the different things that are happening. And, in a lot of those trips, you talk about some of the things that are concerning, but you can also talk about some of the success stories as well. And we got to visit a living shoreline that day. And I think that's living shorelines really are an area where you can show those multiple benefits. And it's kind of like the economic development piece. Living shorelines we tend to build in order to protect private property or public property and make sure that it doesn't erode in the future. But when we're doing that, we're also creating that edge habitat that's so important for both some of our land-based critters, but also for our water-based critters as well. And the science is continuing to develop, but what we're seeing is that those living shorelines that we're creating have much of the same habitat value as natural shorelines. And so that means we're getting the dual benefits of protecting the land behind them, but also ensuring that we help have thriving resources in the water as well. So when you see those fish swimming around the edge of a living shoreline, or you see crabs walking through that habitat that you've created, that really shows you've had the win-win that you want to see.
Yeah, yeah. And when people get to see this, they get even more motivated.
That's right.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, that's amazing. I'm also curious, perhaps it was my own experience, but I felt like Virginia and people in Virginia were like so much more conscious of the environment and, extremely involved. At least that's what it seemed like. But I'm curious what your experience is. I'm not trying to like pit Virginia against like other states
Another
in the
state.
US, but if you want to brag about it, please, by all
So
means.
sure. Well, I think there is a great level of awareness here, especially in Hampton Roads. I mean, Hampton Roads is really a nautical term. People kind of forget that it is actually a term used to describe an area or bodies of water. And so here in Hampton Roads, especially, um, people are driving across, or they're seeing, or they're walking across, or they're biking across water almost every single day, is what it amounts to. And so they really understand that connection to our waterways. And maybe that is the fact that they like to go out and fish or do something similar. Maybe it's the fact they just like to go out and paddleboard or canoe or kayak on our waterways. But they see the different changes in the season in terms of the water maybe having an algae bloom at some time of year, maybe being filled with sediment after a big rainfall. So they understand those connections, and I think that has been really important. Another kind of sign of that is an event that we are fortunate enough to host nowadays. We basically coordinate the event, but it was actually started by folks here around kind of a kitchen table. It's Clean the Bay Day. And so that is a very Virginia-based event. It has now expanded beyond Hampton Roads to throughout Virginia. And it's basically people coming out to help clean up their shorelines and clean up those areas that are connected to our waterways. And so we've had thousands and thousands of volunteers participate that in the over 30 years that it's been going on. Removed millions of pounds of trash as a result of that. And again, it's about developing that connection. Is what it amounts to. And so people can get out and see that they made a difference that day. That's one of the things I really love about Clean the Bay Day is they get to a site in the morning and it has trash on it and things like that. And they, 2 or 3 hours later, they can really see that it has made a difference. And what we're seeing is that our sites are getting cleaner over the years. And that's a good thing for sure.
100%. And as you were talking about, bringing people together, I think I was also, I remember when I was walking through the Brock Center, I saw
Mhm.
you also bring a lot of organizations that work on environment together as well. If you can elaborate on that, I've seen that and it's absolutely incredible.
Sure. Yeah, that was actually one of, I think, the real points of emphasis for us when we were developing the Brock Environmental Center. And so hopefully people who watch this will maybe do a little Google search and learn about the Brock Environmental Center. But we really wanted it to be a community gathering place. And actually this afternoon, we're going to have folks gather and talk about coastal resilience, which seems pretty fitting, being that we have a coastal storm brewing outside as well. But the fact that there are so many different groups with so many different levels of resources that are working on issues that are near and dear and have an effect on the Chesapeake Bay. And, it may be that you're working just in your neighborhood, or you may be working in just a different watershed, like the Lynnhaven River or the Elizabeth River or the Indian River. But all of those people, really can make an impact. But as we all know, when you bring those folks together and have them be able to collaborate, learn from each other, they really do become a stronger outfit as a whole. And so that really has been one of the great things about having the Brock Center here now in Hampton Roads is the fact that we can bring together all those different groups. We can talk about our successes, think about how we want to be strategically better in the future. You obviously talk about some of the things that haven't worked as well as you might have hoped in the past too, but also put names with faces. I think that's one of the things, we still talk about, coming out of COVID in some way, shape, or form. But, all of us in the environmental community tend to really like working with other people, is what it amounts to. And we lost some of that connection during those 2 years or so that a lot of meetings were shut down, a lot of events were shut down and things like that. And so it's really nice to be able to, put a name with a face, have a real conversation with folks. So much of our work has gone hybrid, and that works for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. But there is still something really to be said to making that close personal connection and finding ways to work together in the future.
Since you spoke about COVID, I'm curious because that's a period of time which was also good for the environment because of various reasons. But so is that something that you saw in the Bay, and did you see a complete reversal afterwards, or you were still able to maintain that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think obviously COVID really drove a lot of people outdoors, which was good. It made that connection again to a lot of our natural resources. And I tend to think that's a good thing because I think when it comes to environmental restoration, kind of like myself growing up, you're not going to fight for it if you don't know a whole lot about it in many cases. And so now that people are back out, when they're hiking, when they're bird watching, maybe those are things that they picked up during COVID to still find a way to get out and exercise and things like that. They now have a deeper appreciation for our state's natural resources. And I think that's really important, again, for people in terms of making sure that they then take the next step to advocate for them. And maybe it's something like attending Clean the Bay Day. Maybe it's coming out to a volunteer event where there's going to be a living shoreline installed at a state park or a city park. Maybe they're going to get involved in an oyster restoration program, or maybe the next step they're going to talk or figure out a way to communicate with their elected officials to make a positive impact on those areas that they tend to enjoy.
I'm also curious, when, CBF is looking at policies, what are the key policy focus areas right now, and what are those like incredible policies that's come out, which is essentially protecting the bay and the environment?
Sure. So, as you can imagine, for an organization like ours, they're very wide ranging, and some of them may be, a bit farther away than people expect because they may be way upstream. But a couple different policies that we continue to work on and that we've worked on for a number of years. One of the biggest, and it's where Planetary obviously has a deep-seated connection, is wastewater treatment. And that doesn't necessarily sound like the most engaging term, but our wastewater treatment plants have made tremendous strides, and they've done huge upgrades to reduce the amount of nitrogen pollution that's going into not only the Chesapeake Bay, but really the tributaries, because that's where most of them discharge into. And that has been a real success story. And so making sure that, one, we have the permits that require those reductions is really important. And then also, it's been really important from a CBF perspective that we not only make those changes in the permits, but that we also help those facilities find the funding to do those upgrades so that it doesn't all fall on the ratepayers. And so not everyone's wastewater bill is going up so much. And so, that's an area where we've seen a tremendous amount of success, and we will continue to find new technologies that will help us upgrade more and hopefully reduce the cost of some of those upgrades in the future. But, the vast majority of Virginia is connected to a wastewater treatment plant. There are definitely areas, that are more rural that are not, but the vast majority of our people are some way connected to a treatment plant, and they really have made great strides. So that's one that's maybe not the the coolest, but it has been, a really, really important effort when it comes to bay restoration. So another one are things like the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. That is a buffer that is along the shoreline in most of our communities. Sometimes in Virginia, we refer to it as the 100-foot buffer. But as we kind of talked about with maintaining buffers on agricultural lands, even in developed areas, those habitats are tremendously important for reducing the impact of stormwater, to making sure that we can effectively deal with sea level rise. Um, so making sure that that particular piece of legislation and those policies as they're implemented throughout the Commonwealth stay intact and are strong, as robust as they can be. That's another great example of that. Some of the emerging issues that we work on that have had a bit more of a rural focus have been where we site solar facilities. Virginia has a real big emphasis on having a more diverse portfolio of electrical generation in Virginia, and that's great. But also, we want to make sure we do it in a way that is not simply taking the best available farmland and putting solar panels on that, or cutting down forest everywhere and putting solar panels in an area that used to be covered by forest. We want to think about, what are our generation opportunities in the more built out, the urban and suburban environments as well. And we, again, want to think about what are the resources that we are taking up in some way, shape, or form when we're building solar generation facilities. So those are kind of the balancing pieces that CBF, I think, is very well suited to work in, to make sure, again, as we talked about too, we have a growing and a thriving economy, but we also do it in a way that protects our natural resources as well.
Absolutely does, in my opinion, Chris. And when you were talking about wastewater and the regulation, right? The reason why we were able to also work in Norfolk is because of that regulation in
Hmm.
place. And so we were able to monitor ours. We had our set benchmark placed, and that's something I quote to everyone, by the way.
Right,
So yeah, so kudos to you and CBF for doing that. It's and I hope to talk about that everywhere else as well. Like, and
right.
especially when you were talking about it should that responsibility isn't just about on the wastewater treatment provider, but to ensure that there's more innovation in the space, you look for other opportunities. That's
Hmm.
just incredible. I I don't know. I always find the work of Chesapeake Bay Foundation quite unique because of all of these things. But I'm curious, is this again a more Hampton Roads, Virginia thing, or is it something that you do in other states? What makes CBF so unique?
So, well, I think we're unique in that one, I mean, we obviously have a very well-defined mission in that we're focused on the health of the Chesapeake Bay and its watershed. And so that's kind of your North Star. No matter what you're doing, you're focused very much on making sure that we eventually improve water quality and the overall health and the accessibility of the Chesapeake Bay to the folks that are actually in the watershed. I think the other unique part about CBF, though, is, we have three state offices: Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. We have a federal affairs office as well. We have a bay-wide oyster restoration program, but it's situated in both Maryland and Virginia. It has anchors in both areas. We're actually really excited because later this week, we're actually going to break ground on a new oyster restoration center up in Maryland as well. Um, but what that gets at is that we are able to tailor solutions to the state or the body that we're working at. It's not a one size fits all approach, and that has been very effective. When it comes to oyster restoration, it's a good example. We are very fortunate in the Lower Bay to have really great oyster reproduction. So in general, if we put substrate out there, so that might be recycled shell, could be concrete, reef balls, could be in any manner of substrates. A lot of times, oysters will naturally accrete on those, and we can have a project up and running very quickly. Up in Maryland, we have to put a fair number of extra oysters on that project to kind of jumpstart it as a result of the fact they just don't have the natural reproduction that we have here in the lower bay. So that's a good example. Our agriculture restoration operations, good example. We are very focused on innovative technologies. So here in Virginia, we've been partnered with the James River Association for the last few years, and the focus is on a program called the James River Buffer Program. And what that does is it helps fence those cattle out of streams, builds a buffer between the stream edge and those farm operations, if there's currently a farm operation there. But then it also basically takes over the maintenance for the first 3 years of that project. So the farmer or the landowner doesn't have to worry about going out and mowing and removing invasive species and things like that. And so what the science has told us is that if you can get that buffer through the first 3 years, it will really tend to thrive on its own after that. And so that's a really good example of some of the innovative pieces we're using. And another innovative piece of that program is that we're using GIS tools to basically determine where are the most important places to do buffers. And so there's a system that tiers different pieces of land based on proximity to a waterway, based on what the elevation is, and also the slope, things like that. And then that helps us determine, okay, where should we go in order to make the money that we're spending and the other resources we're spending the most effective for water quality. So that's another good example of those type of changes that we're doing.
And if anybody, whether it's the private sector or anybody else who's looking to sort of work on environmental issues or support you, what are the different ways that they could do that?
Sure. So the first is kind of a little bit of what we talked about earlier. Come out and visit us for a restoration event. I think that's always one of the best ways to get to know the organization and get to know the staff as well. The staff are here because they want to obviously improve the state of the bay and its tributaries, but also because they generally really interact well and enjoy meeting the public and having them, help us in our work. And so that is obviously one of the first ways to do it. Another way, obviously, is to come out and volunteer for some of our events that are more focused on legislative processes or regulatory development. We have a number of different activities associated with making sure that we get good environmental decisions made, whether that be through the General Assembly or through a regulatory body such as the Virginia Marine Resources Commission. So supporting those efforts as well. Another great one that's actually just getting ready to start here in Virginia for the fall is participating in some of our adult education programs. We have an adult education program here in Virginia called Voices, which stands for Volunteers as Chesapeake Stewards. But in that program, like kind of like we talked about earlier, we like to educate folks on a number of different bay issues and bring in experts who are involved in those bay issues throughout the Commonwealth. And so people can, one, get a better understanding of different issues that they may not necessarily be affected by, kind of in their daily lives, but also the ability to connect on something that they may not have thought of before. Or that may be really cool to them. And so giving them that broad brush education, equips them with tools not only to make a difference, in their local community, but also on the state and federal level as well. And it's a great way to get involved with Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
And I agree especially about the team at CBF. To anyone who's listening, they're an incredible bunch. Definitely meet them and definitely volunteer. I think it's just the most amazing experience. And if you had to give any advice to anyone who wants to pursue a career like you, what would it be?
So, I think there's a couple things. First of all, it's one of those things where if you want to pursue a career in natural resources, definitely explore the different opportunities that are out there. Some folks really like to be out, in the resource every day, and they like to again get their feet wet, their hands muddy. There's a lot of opportunities out there as part of those programs. Think about things like policy. It's really important that we have good policies on the ground, and you might not want to spend your life or your career outside where it's really hot in the summertime or really cold in the wintertime. You might like meeting rooms and office spaces and things like that. So I think we always need good folks in the policy realm as well. Chesapeake Bay Foundation does have a litigation staff, and we have attorneys in our three state offices as well. It's really important that we do everything from obviously thinking about litigation, but also making sure that corporations at the state that they are upholding the environmental laws that have been enacted. So, that's another opportunity for folks to get involved as well. So, I think there's so many different opportunities in the environmental space to work. You don't need to necessarily shift too much from what really intrigues you and what really, kind of gets you up in the morning and makes you excited. So think about how that fits into opportunities within an organization like CBF or one of our partner organizations as well.
So much for sharing that, Chris, and this has been absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for joining.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure, everyone will be absolutely excited to listen to this. And of course, hopefully be part of the CBF ecosystem. So
Good.
thanks
Well,
once
thank you
again.
all
Yeah.
for your support, and thank you all at Planetary for being part of the CBF ecosystem as well.